And story after story was like this. I mean, the bulk of the stories that Jim analyzed did this balancing act, okay? And again, what Jim argues and the audience reports seem to indicate is that, audiences seem to feel they have no recourse but to treat both sides as credible and to thus say that nobody knows what's true in these instances. Jim then took a second step. He interviewed the journalists who wrote these stories. And they said, similar to the LA Times reporter who I talked to many years ago, they basically said, this Duisberg is wrong. Ibn Browning was wrong. The chemists were wrong. These were not going to be legitimate scientific claims. But we have to cover them because they are legitimate news stories. And our editors will query us if we declare that this is just bogus and we're not going to write about it. So in multiple cases, controversial narratives show up, even though the journalists know that these are not even Steven sides, that there is one side is far more likely to be right than the other side. It's a real conundrum in the business, and if you do studies that explore coverage of these controversial issues, you see these patterns time and time again. And I want to argue here that while I really understand why journalists do this, again, the validity problem is a serious problem. As a journalist, if you try to declare one group of scientists righter than another group, you run a real risk of your own credibility taking a hit. So I understand the validity problem. I understand that objectivity and balance are surrogate ways of coping with this. But one can, I think, reliably argue that the resulting products do a disservice to audiences. In the case of objectivity, audiences don't have a clue whether what's in that story is even close to being true or not. That's not a good thing. And in these balanced stories, audiences are actually encouraged to think that that no one knows what's true at that given point in time. So one suggestion I have in my own work with journalists and students is what I call a weight of evidence approach to reporting. Again, remember, journalists can't be responsible for sifting through all the science in order to determine themselves what's true and what isn't. But I would argue that they should be responsible for determining where the bulk of experts lie on this truth continuum, and then sharing that information with audiences. And that's what I call a weight of evidence approach. In other words, you can't, as a journalist, individually say, let me tell you what's true, but you can say the bulk of climate scientists in the world believe this. Although there are other scientists who don't, they are essentially outliers in a community where the bulk of the weight of evidence is pointing in this direction. Those stories do acknowledge that there are other viewpoints, and it's actually really critical in stories to do that. Audiences, if they are aware that an issue is controversial, expect to see different points of view in the story. If it's just you saying the bulk of scientists think humans are making a substantial contribution to warming, okay, gosh darn it, readers, even though you're right, readers will immediately argue that you are engaging in biased reporting, that you are making truth claims. So it's important in any controversial story that story indicate that there are different takes on reality. But what's different about a weight of evidence story is it doesn't balance those takes on reality. It's really clear with audiences where the weight of evidence lies. Okay. Now, this sounds like it ought to be a no-brainer. Okay. How controversial can that kind of a story be? But in fact, again, let's go back to our favorite cold fusion story. Again, journalists felt that they could not do this. Okay. If they felt that if they wrote stories that sort of said, you know, a couple of chemists are over here making a claim, but we need to share with you that they are probably wrong, say 99.9% of the physics community that works with fusion, editors actually would reject that kind of an account as an account that somehow devalued the two chemists who were having the press conference in Utah, trivialized the claims that they were making. Okay, so journalists who went after that story felt like they couldn't do the kind of story that I'm suggesting. And we have some evidence that when journalists do attempt this kind of story, they get into trouble. So here's another, oh, too dark again. I wonder why these are so dark, these poor little sweeties. This is there's a hand right there holding a silicone breast implant. Okay, that's that gooey looking thing on the right. Okay, and this is an interesting issue because again, in the United States, some years back, a tremendous controversy erupted when women a number of women felt that problems they were having with implants were spiraling into major health conditions, major illnesses. They began to talk to one another. There were cases where individuals, a few scientists also felt that these implants could cause major health problems. It's literally ballooned, bad verb there, sorry, but into a major issue. Women began having these implants removed, and again, with the attendant risks of surgery. The maker of breast implants, Dow Chemical, finally declared bankruptcy because they were being dragged into court by groups of women who were determined to be compensated for the injuries that they thought they were suffering. It was a very dramatic set of events. And the problem was there was no good evidence about the link between these implants and health problems. However, out in the rest of the world, there were some big epidemiological studies underway, mostly in Europe. And the studies included, among the things they asked about in these epi-studies were, they actually had data. They recorded whether individuals in the study had any kind of, had things like breast implants. And so they were able to follow these women over time to see if individuals with breast implants were more likely to have health problems than those who were not. So there was an epi-study. It was not cross-sectional in a sense, it was over time, so you actually could get at the notion of causality as a result. And when those data came in, as is the case, I think, in a lot of these controversies, the answer was there was no link between implants and the type of health problems that women were reporting, okay? Connective tissue problems and immune response problems and things. No evidence whatsoever that implants were linked to those problems. New York Times reporter Gina Collada is a weight of evidence reporter, and she covered this issue. There was a front page story in the New York Times where she literally wrote a weight of evidence story where she said, again, for years, controversy has bubbled over breast implants. There are communities of individuals, she says in her story, who feel very strongly that these implants cause health repercussions. But then she said, major epidemiological studies whose results have just been reported indicate that there is no link. And made it clear that this is what a weight of evidence story does. These are the best scientific data we have to date, and they do not support that link. It was fascinating to watch what happened after that story came out. Gina was excoriated by the women who were just outraged that the linkage that they to this day firmly believe exists wasn't proved, by journalists who were unnerved by the fact that a reporter might make that kind of weight of evidence assertion. I remember one article in an American magazine that accused Gina of being in the pocket of Dow Chemical. In other words, biased reporting, right? Saying things that would be that would fit the belief system and the pocketbook of the industry itself. It was a fascinating scenario to watch, and I think it illustrated the challenge of doing something even as simple as sharing with readers or viewers where the weight of evidence lies.